One of the most well-known names in racing is Petty. First of all, let's take a look back at the Petty legacy, then sit back, relax, and enjoy a conversation with Kyle and the King. Our story begins where Route 220 crosses Branson Mill Road. This wide spot in the road, known as Level Cross, North Carolina, is home to one of racing's most celebrated families. It all began in 1928 when 16-year-old Lee Petty traded his bicycle for a Model T. The first thing he did was strip it down, soup it up, and race it around the countryside. In 1947, he and brother Julie took a 1937 Plymouth Coupe up to a dirt track in Danville, Virginia, and won the very first race they entered. During his 14-year career, Lee made it to the top of the Grand National ranks, winning 3 national championships and the very first Daytona 500. When he retired in 1962, he left racing more than his name and his records. He left his son. It was clear early on that the driver of number 43 was no ordinary racer. During the record-shattering 1967 season, he won 27 races, including 10 consecutive victories. Most records in those days were held by his father, and Richard made almost a hobby out of breaking them. He broke Lee's record for the most victories by winning his 55th race at Darlington in 1967. And he bested Dad's 3 national championships, winning his 7th in 1979. While he wasn't allowed to start driving until age 21, he's now running almost 1,200 races and won an untouchable 200. The King is probably the most recognized stock car racer in the world. Richard's other lifelong love is his family, the former Linda Owens, who he married in 1959, and their 4 children, Sharon, Lisa, Rebecca, and Kyle. Kyle grew up much like his father, spending a lot of time at racetracks with his 3 sisters. At age 19, Kyle too was bitten by the bug to race. In 1979, Kyle climbed behind the wheel and entered the ARCA 200-mile stock car race in Daytona. He took the racing world by storm, and just like his grandfather Lee Petty, Kyle won the very first race he entered. NASCAR's first third-generation driver then hit a dry spell. It would be 1986, 7 long years later, before he again would visit the winner's circle. Also in 1979, Kyle married former Miss Winston, Patty Huffman. They moved 10 miles down the road from Level Cross to High Point, North Carolina, to raise her 3 children, Adam, Austin, and Montgomery Lee. In his 3rd year with Sabco Racing and with a new sponsor, many thought Kyle was poised for great success in 1991. He won the pole and the race for the 2nd straight year at Rockingham, but then came Talladega in May. Kyle suffered a broken left leg in the 19-car pileup and spent most of the season in therapy working to regain strength and mobility.
You got it. Doing good. Yeah, good.
The Pettys have endured racing's roughest times. But with almost 260 victories and 10 national championships, this family has also been to the top of the mountain. How was you when you started going to the racetrack?
How old?
Yeah.
12 years old when Daddy first started.
You was 12. What did you think when your daddy got him a race car?
Well, he had run a little bit before that. I'm ahead of myself here. Like in 47 or something like that, him and his brother had a modified car. And they'd run like, I think they run 3 races with it. They run 1st, 2nd, and 3rd and lost money with it, so they finally abandoned it to do. But the first race I remember going with him was with a modified car. It had like a 38 Plymouth or something. And we went to Lynchburg, Virginia. Had a little old 1/3 of a mile dirt track or something up there. I think we ran the racetrack after they asphalted it, but they was running it dirt at that time. And that's the first memory of me going to a racetrack.
And you went with Lee as you grew older. While you was in high school, did you go all the races, or Did he lead you home some?
Basically, when he first started with the Winston Cup deal, Grand Nationals at that time, we just worked on the car at home. But you didn't do that much work on the car. You changed oil, and you just made sure everything was tight on the car and all this kind of stuff. And like I said, I wasn't but 12 years old, so they didn't let me do much except sweep up and clean up and, you know, get ready to go. And at that time, they wasn't running but probably, you know, 12 or 15 races. So they wasn't really gone that much when, you know, the first year or two. And so I guess in 49, I probably didn't go with him very much. In 50, I think we spent all summer with him. And, you know, we'd help him on the car, whatever little, you know, 12 or 13-year-old could do. And then as time progressed, then racing got more complicated. We got more involved in it because my brother and myself got older, and we had to do more to the race car. And then as that went along, all during the summer we'd go. Any race around close we could go if we had time to get back and go to school. Anything that we couldn't get back and go to school, then Mother wouldn't let us go. So we didn't get to go on, you know, if you went to Ohio or something and they wasn't going to get back till, you know, the next day somewhere, you know, we couldn't go. But we went to all the races that we could get back and still go to school.
When did you figure out you wanted to drive?
I didn't hear you.
When did you figure out you wanted to drive?
Well, really, I never thought a whole lot about driving. I worked on the car, and I was just tickled to death to be around the car and work on the car and stuff. And, you know, being my father was my hero, then, you know, I just didn't ever think about him not driving from now on. And I just kept working on the car, and we went through high school and got out of school and still just worked on the car. Never really thought that much about driving. But everywhere you'd go, people come up and said, you know, when you going to start driving? And I said, I don't know. You know, just went along with it and didn't think that much about it. And then when I guess when I did get to be 18 years old, I said, you know, I might like to try this. So again, I asked him about it, and he said, no. I said, you know, you're not old enough. You know, you learn a lot by the time you from 18 to 21. Said, come back when you're 21. And basically, those are the words he used. And I said, okay. So I just forgot about it. Didn't even think a thing about it, and didn't even, when I got close to the 21st birthday, I wasn't jumping up and down getting excited about, you know, I'm going to get to drive. And just come in one day, and I said, okay, I'm 21. He said, okay, there's a car over there, get it ready and go. And that's the way we done it.
So when Kyle was born, when did he start hanging around going to the racetrack?
When Kyle was born, I think he was born in June, and in February, I don't know if he'd been to any races or not, but in February we used to go to Daytona for 3 weeks, right? So we throwed him in the car and throwed all the stuff in, and away we would go down the road. And we had a truck, and it had an automatic transmission in it. We got down to about Orangeburg, South Carolina, probably about 9 o'clock, 8 or 9 o'clock that morning, because we'd left real early. And the transmission come out. Linda and Marcia's wife, she had a little girl, I think, and Kyle, they sat on the side of the road till about 6 o'clock at night. By the time we got the transmission out, took it in town, got the thing fixed, brought it back, put it in the truck, and got ready to go. And so that was his inauguration into going to the races. But he's always went. And then when the rest of them come along, we just threw them in the truck or a car, and away they went. So he'd been around and racing all the time. You know, he played with Dale Jarrett, he played with the Allison boys, all of that crowd. You know what I mean? And they'd go off while, you know, Buddy Baker's kids and stuff. I mean, we'd all be out racing each other. They'd all be in there playing football or hide and seek in the infield or whatever they done. And so he was just racing all his life, I guess.
Let's see, you were born in what year?
1960.
And Richard, your father started driving in 58?
58.
So as long as you remember, racing has been a part of your life.
Forever. That's exactly. My mother says that I was born in June of 1960, and we started going to the races about 2 weeks later. And I've gone to Daytona. That's what I always tell everybody. I've been coming to Daytona every year since 1961, twice a year, except when my father didn't go in '65. So I've been going to Daytona forever. But you know, it's every time Richard Petty went to the racetrack, we went to the racetrack right along with him when I was young.
When did you realize that your father was someone special?
Not until I was, probably not until the early 70s, not until I was 11 or 12 years old. And, you know, because even up till that time, I thought everybody's father had a garage beside their house. I thought everybody's father had race cars, you know what I mean? They didn't race everywhere we raced, but I felt like everybody had race cars. And it wasn't until I was 10 or 11 years old that I realized it. When we would be out in public and somebody would come up and want his autograph when we were having dinner, and I would have a friend with me, and you know, the friend's jaw would just drop open. You know, they just couldn't believe somebody would come up and want autographs and stuff. And it kind of amazed them, and then I started looking at it, and it looked different to me then. You know, it had been normal up till that time, and then I noticed that it was a little odd after I started hanging around with normal people, I guess. But it was probably the early 70s when he, you know, after he won his 100th race and then began to win more and more, and everything got to be so much bigger and bigger, then you begin to take a little bit more notice.
Did he believe in sparing the rod and spoiling the child as you were growing up?
No, definitely not. He never spared the rod, believe me. And what was amazing is he told my mother never to spare the rod either. That was the bad part. But we'd be in trouble, and if it was just minor trouble, then my mother would take care of it. But we knew we were in big trouble when she'd say, "We're just going to wait till your father gets home." And a lot of times he was gone for 4 or 5 days, and that 4 or 5 day waiting period until he got home was twice as bad as the punishment that he dished out whenever he finally did get home, believe me.
I just can't imagine the king sitting down and talking to a child and spanking him on the butt. I just can't imagine that.
Well, we did some things that we deserved spanking for. They were building some buildings at Petty Enterprise, and this was like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and they poured all this, my father and grandfather and everybody was there, and they poured all this nice new concrete, and they must have poured, I don't know, 5,000 square feet of it. I mean, a real nice place. It was going to take, you know, a day or so before it dried, and they were going to the racetrack. Well, as soon as they drove out the driveway, we got all the dogs and put them in the wet concrete. And we'd run them through the wet concrete and wouldn't let them out of the wet concrete. And I'm going to tell you, when it did dry, it looked like somebody drove through it with a tractor. And I think that cost a pretty good amount of money for them to come back and fix. And that was, I think that was one of those extended punishments that lasted for years.
You remember the time you were building the shop over there and you poured the cement floor, and Kyle and Maurice's kids got the dogs and threw them on the new floor and hemmed them up and just ran back and forth and back and forth?
Oh, it was beautiful, man. I mean, you know, we had to run them around here and get all the dogs off, do the whole deal again. But that's kids for you. I mean, that's not a deal where you get mad about it at the time, and then when it's over with, you sort of laugh about it. But, you know, it's just a deal that they was creative, okay? They were a creative art. They said, we'll turn these dogs loose here and we'll get all this done. But the other deal on that was Daddy was always bad about the cement, too. If we lay a little cement, he goes and slips around after everybody leaves, goes, puts his name in it, puts the date on the thing. So I guess they had seen their granddaddy do it, so they said, well, now, if granddaddy can do it, we're going to leave our mark. So they left their mark.
That was a herd of dogs running across the cement. Kyle,
the best bit on that, let me tell you this little tale here.
Okay.
Kyle was about probably 5 years old, and he had a little sister that was 4 years old. Well, I bought him one of these mini bikes. That was when the mini bike deal was a little bitty tricycle deal or a bicycle deal with a motor on it. So I went out in the front yard here, and I said, okay, now here's, you know, you get on this, and this is what makes it go, and here's the brakes, and you go ride, you know, and you be real slow, real careful with it. So he goes out and he rides around the big front yard, and Daddy's there, rides and rides, and so I said, well, you know, he's got this down pretty good. So I go back in the shop. About 10 minutes later, I said, I told him not to run that thing that fast. Go out there, my 4-year-old girl is on it, her hair blowing back about 2 foot, she's wide, cotton picking open. He ain't told her nothing, didn't tell her how to stop that thing. She's out there just, I mean, running through the cars and up around the shop. Instead of being out in the field, she done got up in here somehow. So I had to run out there and grab her as it went by because she didn't know to let off on it, slow it down. She didn't know where the brakes was or nothing. Now, he got a whipping for that.
Oh, he did?
What did Richard say when you walked in, or did you ever voice your intentions to be a race car driver to Richard?
Oh, yeah. Voiced them over a lot of years. Over a lot of years, really. From the time I was 15, really.
You
started, you know, saying, well, when I start driving, or what about this, or maybe I can get a car and go to Caraway, or maybe we can do this, and it's, no, 21. I didn't get to start till I was 21. You don't get to start till you're 21. And, you know, we went through all this stage, and then finally, about the time I got out, when graduation was coming from high school, you know, and we sat down and we talked about it again, and I told him, I said, here's the deal. Just let me try it, you know what I mean? I'm 18, give me a shot, and we'll try it for 6 months, or we'll try it for a year, and if I see that I don't like it, or if I think in my mind that I can't do it, then I'll go to college. And I won't be but a year behind or 6 months behind the people that I've grown up with in school and stuff, and that won't be a major problem. But just let me try it right now. So finally he said, yeah, you know, we'll try it. So then we told Mom, and she said no. So then we had to give her the same speech all over again, so that took another 6 or 7 months. So it took a while to get it all, everybody coordinated and into the right way of thinking, but it wasn't an overnight deal.
When did you discover that Kyle, you thought was going to be a race car driver?
Well, it come kind of a surprise. You know, he'd been going all these races and all these years, and everybody asked him the same thing they asked me, when you going to drive? And he said, you know, don't worry about it. And, you know, he went through high school, he played football, basketball, whatever else was going on. And I never thought he was that interested, even though in the summer, and he got where he'd go with Dale and them and travel with them, you know, to the races, and he'd come in the shop, started working in the shop, learned to weld, and, you know, work on the race car and all this stuff. But he never really showed a whole lot of enthusiasm about, you know, wanting to follow that. And then when he got to be a senior in school, you know, kept trying to get him to make up his mind, you know, wanted him to go to college and all this stuff, and he kept putting me off. And one day he come in, he said, I tell you what, he said, I'll trade something off with you. He said, you know, you're going to spend your money for me to go to college for 4 years. He says, why don't we just, and I said, when I get through, he said, I want to drive a race car. And he said, why don't we just take those 4 years, spend your money, and put me in a race car, and let me use those 4 years as my college. And I said, well, I can't really argue with it, you know, with the principle of the thing. So what he did, basically, to get the ball rolling, was he went over there and he talked to Dale Inman and Wade Thornburg. They was the ones that looked after my car. So he kept just picking at them and talking to them, worked on them about probably a month or two, trying to convince them to help him work on a car before he ever said anything to me or his mother. And so they finally said, yeah, if, you know, you talk your daddy into running, we'll work on the car for you and we'll help you. So then he come to me, and he said, okay, he said, I got me some help over here. He said, all I need is a car now, you know what I mean? So anyhow, we sat down and had a big talk about it, and then I said, okay, I said, I can do that. And I said, now how you going to convince your mother? I said, that's going to be the big deal. And he said, well, you're going to have to help me. That's really, you know, that's really, he said something to me first.
So did Richard help you talk Linda into it, or did you do it?
No, he figured he was going to have to live with this woman the rest of his life.
Yeah.
So he didn't try to talk her into anything. It was her, first it was myself talking my father into it. And then it was like, okay, I got the okay from him, and then it was like, now you got to go get the okay from your mother. You know how you are when you want to spend a night with somebody and your mother says, go ask your father. Your father says, go ask your mother. Well, it's the same way. So, and this was something I wanted to do for the rest of my life, was drive a race car, and they were batting it back and forth.
And it's, your mother had seen Richard in a few crashes that was pretty severe. Darlington, I recollect Darlington in 1970. So I'm sure that she has some apprehensions about her baby boy getting in a race car.
My mother had a lot of apprehensions for a lot of different reasons. You know, she had grown up, she was married to my father when my grandfather wrecked in the early 60s and had his bad accident, so she knew what that was like. She'd seen my father in a lot of bad wrecks. She'd seen him with broken arms and broken ribs and, you know, a lot of bad stuff. My mother's only brother was killed in a pit crew accident at Talladega. So, you know, she knew the good sides and the bad sides of racing, and that's the one way that she looked at it, and she probably explained it to me almost better than my father could, that, you know, if you do choose this lifestyle, and if this is what you really want to do, then there's going to be some really, really high points, but there's going to be some really, really low points too. And you've got to take both. You know, you can't just say, I want the wins, I want the victories, I want all this stuff, and disregard all the crashes and all the times that you don't have a ride and all the times that you aren't winning races and aren't making any money. So she understood that it was going to be up and down, and she wasn't, you know, she didn't really want that for her son, I guess. And I mean, there's a lot of people that wouldn't want that for anybody, you know. But you know, after we talked and we sat down and had a pretty long talk about it, then she realized that that's what I wanted to try. So finally she said, yeah, you know, you can take a car and go to Daytona and test, and if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Will you ever forget that first trip to Daytona? I mean, you set the racing world on its ear. You know that, don't you?
I'll never forget it. Of all the times I'd ever been to Daytona, like we talked earlier, I've been going down there since I was born. We went through that tunnel in a pickup truck with a race car on a flatbed trailer behind it, and it was my race car. And I was going to get to drive around this place for the first time. And all of a sudden, this place took on a totally different light, totally different meaning. And it was a big running joke around the race shop, at our race shop, that the first time I got in a race car, that I wouldn't run 150 miles an hour around Daytona. Well, they were running 190, 195, something like that. And I said, well, shoot, anybody can run 150 miles an hour around this place. And so I went out and got in the car, and my father took it out, and he shook it down, and he said, well, you're not going to get hurt in it. You know, it's going to be pretty safe. And I was real fortunate for two things. Let me preface this with this. They had just repaved the racetrack, and Goodyear had just came out with a new tire, and it was a little bit softer tire. So, I mean, anything stuck on a racetrack. It wasn't a major problem with the car being real loose or anything. And so he had it pretty much where when you go in the corner, it just smoked the right front. It pushed so bad. And the first couple of laps, I think the first lap I ran 150.1 or something, just a tick over 150. Next lap was about 135. But I was going to get that 150 mile an hour lap in. But, you know, it amazed me that I couldn't tell where I was at. I couldn't tell whether I was on the straightaway. I couldn't tell whether I was in the corner, because I'd never even driven any short tracks, and I didn't know anything about racing. So, you know, we went down there, and it took 4 days before I ever got to where I was real comfortable with it and got up to speed and got to where I could run. And I started getting faster and faster and faster, and finally they said, put it on the trailer before you crash it, or we're not going to be able to come back and race. So we loaded it up, and then we're fortunate to go back and race, and won the race down there.
Won your first race?
I don't know how. I shouldn't have won that race. If everybody would go back and analyze that race, I shouldn't. There were a couple of cars that were really faster, and a lot of drivers that were a whole lot better. But I had a good car. I didn't have any brain in my head. And I was 18 years old, so I was crazy. So that was on my side, and I had a lot of luck, because the guys that were running faster and that were better, a couple of them had trouble, and it left it to a two-car race between me and one other guy, and I was just fortunate enough to beat him at the end of the race. But that was all equipment. That wasn't any driver. That was an all-equipment win.
When he went to Daytona that first time and won the race, what did that make you feel like?
You know, it made you feel good. You know, leading up to that, we went down and we did some testing with our car, and we took Kyle down for a couple of days of testing. So, you know, I went out and run around in the car, make sure the car was good. Went out and told Kyle, I said, you follow me. You know what I mean? I'll show you where to run and all that. So we went out and played around with that. So I said, okay, now it's your turn. So he goes out and he runs a little bit, and I think the first or second lap he ran around like 170 mile an hour. You know, he's warming up. You know what I mean? Okay. And anyhow, he finally got up to 178 the first day. I said, that's fine. I said, you bring him in. He don't need to run no more, you know, no faster. So then we went back out the next day, and I think he ran 182 or 83. But we got him to run a lot of laps. And then when he come back for the race and stuff, I think he qualified 191 or 92. He was outside pole anyway. So I sat down before the race. I said, okay, Kyle. I said, you've never been in a race. And I said, all we want you to do is finish the race. I said, miss everybody, just take it easy. I said, when they throw the flag, go down in the corner and sort of, you know, get you a good groove there, and sort of let these cats that want to race, you know, sort of let them go on by and go on, and you just settle down. I said, if you could finish in the first 8 or 10, I said, it'd be great for your first race. Throw the green flag, he goes down in the corner, he's leading the race. I mean, you know, he's really paying attention to what his daddy tells him about what's doing. Led the race, run first and second all day, wound up beating the boy the last lap or two on the race. So, you know, I felt good, but I was up watching some of the things that he done and he got by with, you know. And I talked to him when the race was over, and, you know, like I say, we felt great because he won the race and stuff, but the car was so much better than the rest of the cars, all he had to do was miss everybody. And he got lucky and done that. And when the race was over, and, you know, we talked about what he'd done wrong and all that. And, you know, he said, I know I was just lucky. He said, I got a long way to go. So it wasn't a deal that he thought he was anywhere, you know what I mean? And then we said, okay, you know, we know you got a lot of learning to do on this running. So what we did then, when probably 3 weeks after that or whatever, might have been a month or two. Anyhow, we went to Charlotte. We was going to run, maybe let him run Charlotte. So we took him over there and took him out and showed him how to run. He ran about 4 or 5 laps and run into the wall. So we brought it home. We worked on the car. Went back the next day, run about 5 or 6 more laps and just wiped the car out. So, okay, time out. You know, we're going to have to approach this thing a little bit different. So then, you know, it was just a matter of learning and stuff. You know, I don't know that we did it like it should have been done. We might should have started him off on the short tracks and kept him out of the Winston Cup deal. Even though we did buy a short track car and let him run some of them, we never really pursued it enough to really give him experience. So all his experience he was learning with the big boys. But I felt like by doing that, my strategy was that if you learn from good people, then you're going to be good. If you learn from people that's not quite so good, you're going to have to relearn when you get with the good people. So, you know, we just looked at it a little bit different than other people.
Would you have been better off to finish about 10th that first race?
I'd have been better off not to have even gone to Daytona that year. I'd have been better off, you know, hindsight's 20/20, but I would have probably been better off to go and just start racing, you know, at Caraway or at a local short track or run some dirt and stuff. And I'll give you a story here. I went to Daytona and ran that race and won that race. And I was 18 years old, and my head went from being this big to being this big. Oh. And I was convinced I could drive a race car. I mean, it was no problem. So we came over here to Charlotte, and that was in February. We came to Charlotte the first part of, let's see, February and March, I guess the end of March. And was going to do some testing over here. So Daddy took the car out, and he tested. And, you know, it run pretty good. So he said, now you get in it. Well, I wasn't paying any attention to him out there riding. I knew how to drive a race car. I didn't have to listen to Richard Petty. So he pulls the car in, he parks it, and I get in it, and I go out and I warm up a couple of laps. First lap, I go down in the corner, first corner, and I barrel in, and I hit the white line, and I turn, and I'm still on it. I hit the wall coming out of two, just flat side the car. So I come in, and Dale's standing there, and Daddy's standing there, and they said, well, you know, what happened? And I said, I don't know what y'all did to this car, but it won't turn. And I'll never forget it. Dale Inman looked at me, and he said, you know why this car won't turn? And I said, I don't have any idea. And he said, because you didn't let up off the gas. You've got to let up off the gas. And I said, you mean you can't drive around Charlotte wide open? And he said, nobody ever has. I said, if I'd have made it off too, I'd have had a half a shot at it.
You'd have been a hero.
Been a hero for a little while. I didn't know you couldn't drive around every racetrack wide open. That's how smart I was. I thought you could go everywhere you went and run wide open. But I tore up a few cars over at Charlotte before those 3 days of testing were over.
Then you found out your head went from this big back down to
real small. I didn't want to come out in public for a while.
Didn't want to be seen?
No.
At Sears Point, Richard hit the wall hard down in turn 1. I was down there, and in 2 or 3 minutes, you was there on crutches. Did the fact that just about a month prior to that, you had broken your leg, do you have a better understanding of just how hard it hurts when a race car hits the wall, or you can get hurt now? You look like that Kyle Petty I'd never seen before standing beside his car at Sears Point.
That was, you know, that was a weird deal. I just happened to be in that corner at a Mobil One hospitality tent that was over there, and we were watching the race, and he came through, and as you know, the car skidded off. But the way it hit and the angle it hit and the suddenness of how it hit, then it hit and stopped real quick. And, you know, I was across the racetrack and he wasn't really moving. And I remember when I hit and got hit in the door and drove over, then the car stopped, but everything just went dead all of a sudden. You know, you didn't know whether anybody was coming. You didn't know what was going to happen. So I was in a hurry to get over there to see what was going on and see how he was. I knew that he had hit really hard. That was, of all the, you know how it is when you're driving and you see a car that's wrecked, you can tell how hard it's hit, you know what I mean? And I knew this car had hit a ton. And I had some guys, and they lifted me up over a 6-foot chain link fence and dropped me down on the other side because I couldn't bend my leg. I was still on crutches and came down the hill and across the racetrack. And, you know, by the time I got over there, it knocked the breath out of him, but he was bruised up really bad. You could tell it. He already had a big swollen place on his cheek. His leg was already swollen real big in his uniform and stuff. And he wasn't moving his right leg too good, but he could move his arms and stuff and move around. And I knew he was awake, and he's hard-headed enough that he's going to get out on his own no matter what. And so I knew he was all right, but it gives you a different appreciation, I guess, when after you've been in a wreck and you've been hurt. I think we all drivers, you know, you think you're pretty much invincible because you just drive, and you wreck, and you flip, and you hit, and you blow tires, and you get out and you walk away, and you're a little sore, but you're not really hurt bad. But once you have a wreck and you have to set out a while, it gives you a different outlook on what a wreck really is.
I remember he crashed one time early, I guess back in the early 80s, coming off turn 4 at Daytona. He got in a crash, and what'd you do, go down and jump the fence or something to get to
That was in one of the 125-mile races. And we was on top of the trucks there, and they crashed coming off the 4, and I don't know, it was about a 10 or 12-foot fence there. I don't know how I got across that thing, but I was standing out there when all the cars got stopped, and he's standing up on the wall looking around and said, "What are you doing out here?" You know what I mean? And same thing happened when I broke my leg out there in California. Kyle's on 2 crutches, and I don't know where he's at, he's somewhere. And here I crash on the racetrack on the far side away from everybody, laid out there, and when I reach up and pull the net down, the first one I see is Kyle. He's standing there on them 2 crutches, and he got across a chain link fence, run across the racetrack, and was there by the time I got my breath back and could undo the deal. So I guess he was paying me back what I'd done for him at Daytona.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, NASCAR told me, I was out there by where you hit the wall at Sears Point, and NASCAR told me not to go on the racetrack. But when I looked at him and saw Kyle out there with 2 crutches, I said, "Man,"
said, "I can go now,
I can
right?
go on the racetrack."
I guess that's the inner deal. If it had been you, I wouldn't have jumped across the fence to see him.
Right.
And
That's
you
right.
know what I mean? And it was just a father-son relationship, but you know it's part of you, so you do extra things when something like that comes up.
You don't worry about Richard Petty on the racetrack, but you worry about Kyle Petty, don't you?
Well, yeah, I always have. To begin with, it was really hard because you'd run and you'd be racing around out there, see them yellow lights come on, and the first thing you do, you call on the radio, you look around, you know, where's Kyle? About halftime, he was in one of them, you know what I mean? But that was always a real concern, and it's still a concern, but it's a minimal deal now. I mean, it's just come. He got where I feel like he's a lot more professional, better cars, but he knows what's going on. So I don't get all excited every time I see a caution flag when he's on the racetrack now. Before I did, and as time progressed, then I've got the more confidence in the deal that, you know, that he wasn't part of it. So it's still, you know, you look around and see what's going on, but and also makes it a little bit different is now most of the time he's in front of me, I can see him. Before, when he first started, he was behind, I couldn't see him.
In racing, we have the Pettys, the Allisons. Why is family such a big part of stock car racing?
You can answer it. we got
the Parsons, right?
and the Waltrips, you know what I mean? I don't know why family, you know, I know why our family was. Is because we were brought up in it. That's the only lifestyle we knew. And I think that it's the same way with as far as Bobby and Davey. You know, that's all Davey knew because that's what Bobby did and that's what Donnie did and that's what those guys did. But we were, you know, my grandfather raced. My father was exposed to it at an early age from the time he was 8 or 9 years old. He grew up in racing, grew up around racing people. I think one reason that really is pretty neat about stock car racing, especially, is that all the drivers get along good. All the crews get along good. Drivers drive for this team, but they might get along with that crew, or they might get along with this guy on this crew. And it's just, even though there's 400 or 500 people at the racetrack, it's like an extended family. So everybody just encompasses everybody else. And, you know, you like growing up in that atmosphere. When I used to go to the racetrack when I was little, when I was 9, 10 years old, and sat in the back of my father's truck because Bill Gasaway wouldn't let you out into the garage area and stuff, and David Pearson would come by and talk to you, or Bobby Isaac would come by and talk to you. And you know, Dave Marcus would come on the truck and eat a sandwich this long, you know what I mean? And, you know, and they'd stand there and talk to you. And, I mean, you know, how many other sports do you go into where superstars of that stature talk to a 9 or 10-year-old boy, or 11 or 12-year-old boy, and you see your father do the same thing to talk to other kids and to talk to people? And, you know, it's just, it just breeds, it's a family type deal, you know, where you want to be involved in it, you want to do what your father did, and you want to carry on that tradition, maybe, is what it is. So, you know, I guess that's as good an answer as I have.
You know, we've heard of the Hatfields and McCoys. You know, they got into a feud, and they fought for years and years and years. Now, the Allisons and the Pettys had some feuds going back in the 60s. Now, did you view the Allisons any differently than any of the other people?
No, not really. We didn't. You know, I'm sure my father and my uncle did, because they were racing against them. But as far as us, and it was amazing. And we talked about this when I first signed up with Mellow Yellow this year with the Coca-Cola company. I'll never forget when Bobby was driving for Junior and driving the Coca-Cola car, and they had all the Coca-Cola stuff, and we all stayed at the same hotel in Daytona. All the Pettys and all the Allisons, Donnie and his family, Pam and all of them, and Davey and Bonnie and his sisters and everybody, they had all the cool floats, because every float they had Coca-Cola on. They had Coca-Cola inner tubes. They had Coca-Cola this. They had Coca-Cola, and we always wanted to play with them. And, you know, it's like, well, we're not going to let you play with them. And then Bobby and them would come by and they'd say, well, we'll just bring you some. So they'd just bring us a bunch of Coca-Cola floats. So then we were as cool as Allisons were. So we were all right. But, you know, it was one of those deals where the kids grew up and the kids never got involved in that part of it. We knew our fathers raced against each other. We knew they were competitors with each other. But what went on the racetrack didn't make any difference to what went on in the infield or what went on after the race.
Bobby and myself had a heck of a feud going. You know, we'd argue and fight and run into each other and all that. The kids are still in the infield playing with each other. They didn't get involved in it at all. And I guess they knew it was happening, but they wasn't concerned with the thing. And, you know, Bobby's mother and daddy and stuff, every time we'd go to a race, like I said, me and Bobby wouldn't be talking. Linda'd go talk to them, or they'd come to talk to Linda, you know, and they's all buddy-buddy. Everything was fine with them because they wasn't involved in the deal. And then their sons and husbands would get out on the racetrack and run into each other. But like I say, while we was doing that, the kids, they wasn't involved in it either, and they was still playing around.
Now, Kyle's got his career started. He leaves home, he gets married and leaves home. And you adopt Michael Waltrip. Now, what brought all that on?
Well, we didn't mean to. It sort of happened. What happened, we built him a baby grand car. And so he had some bikers to do that. So they sent him down sort of see what was going on, sort of work on the car because they didn't have that many people. So he worked on the car. And when he got here, he didn't have no place to stay. And I said, well, just come over to the house and stay. Well, they run the baby grand car for a race or two, and that deal sort of went away. But Michael didn't go away.
He could have stayed there.
So Michael found a home, so he stayed, and I guess he stayed, what, 9 or 10 months. And but what he'd do, he'd go to the races with us, he'd go do all the stuff, but he was digging along, trying to get something going. Even though he was running some baby grands and stuff, he was trying to get something going in the Winston Cup. And he figured if he was there every day aggravating enough people, someday he'd get a chance, and that's what he done. He was really, really persistent, and he stayed with it. And then once he got him a situation with some boys out of Statesville or somewhere, then he come in, moved up his little bag, and away he went. So, you know, like I say, he stayed with us a pretty good while. Controlling him and Kyle was about the same. Linda had to approach both of them just about the same deal. Kyle moved out, Michael moved in Kyle's room, left his clothes thrown on the floor just like Kyle. Linda had to cook for him just like Kyle, you know, the whole deal. So it was just, both of them were just just about like it.
And they still are.
They still are. And not a bit. Both of them are trying to do their own thing, and they're going in the same direction.
And both of them, it looks like, are going to be superstars in this business, doesn't it?
Well, they got a good chance. You know, they really determined people. They're good race car drivers. They're good PR people. So they've got a lot of, both of them are good-looking boys. They're young yet. You know, they got a lot of stuff going for them. And if both of them keep their nose clean and go ahead and stay dedicated to what they want to do, then they're going to be able to take over a lot of stuff.
All right, now your oldest boy is how old now?
11, just turned 11.
He's 11. 7 more years when he's 18. When he comes to you and says, Daddy, I want to drive. You remember that conversation that you talked about just a few moments ago that you had with Richard? You going to tell him to go see his mama?
I'm going to tell him to go see his granddaddy. Or maybe I could tell him to go see his grandmother, since she owns the team now that my father drives for. Maybe I'll tell him that. I don't know what I'm going to tell him. You know, we're in a little bit different situation. I wish we weren't. But when I was growing up, then I had a race shop right next door to me. And if I rode motorcycles or bicycles or whatever, if it broke, I went right next door and we fixed it. And I learned to work on my motorcycles when I was really young, because I'd drag my motorcycle in there and it'd be in 800 pieces, and Daddy'd say, fix it. You don't fix it, you don't ride it. You know what I mean? But we had the tools and had the equipment and had people that knew how to tell me what to do. Where, you know, my little boys right now are growing, but they're separated from it to some extent. You know, if I had my own race shop, they'd be right there, and they'd understand a little bit more about it. So I'm not really sure when the bug's going to bite them or whether the bug will bite them. You know, because like I say, there's a line in between them, or they're separated from it a little bit. When that day does come, then, you know, I'm going to approach it just like my father approached it. And I think he approached it racing with me the same way he approached everything with my sisters and everything. He always told us from a real early age, whatever you decide to do in life, do what's going to make you happy. Do what you're going to have fun at, and do what you're going to enjoy, because whatever you choose, you're more than likely going to have to do it for the rest of your life. It's not something that you can switch around and change off and stuff. And whatever you choose, I'll be behind you 100%, and I'll help you as much as I can in that direction. And I decided to race. I had one sister that decided to be a teacher. She went to college. Another sister got married. And I have one sister that wants to be an artist right now, and she's going to art school. So he sent her off in that direction. So he's helped all of us go off in the directions that we wanted to go off in. And, you know, right now, that's all I'm looking at. Whichever direction they want to go in, then I hope that I can point them in that direction and send them off in that direction with a good start and with a little bit of a head start if you could, but just let them do what they want to do.
So if he wants to be a musician or a race car driver, whichever direction he wants to go in, that's the direction you'll help him go.
That's the direction.
If we're going to be going talking to Richard and get us some views on you growing up and how he views the situation, if you'd like to say one thing to Richard, what would that be? Think back hard. And what one thing would you like to say to Richard?
Oh, I'm not sure that there's one thing that I could say to him that it's hard to explain, that would express how I feel about all that he's done for me, all that he and my mother both have done for me. As far as what I did when I was young, for the way they brought me up, for what they let me do when I was young to give me enough rope to go hang myself, but driving me back in just before I did hang myself. And, you know, there's so much that he's done with race cars, off the racetrack, on the racetrack, to help me to where I feel like I'm beginning to get ahead in what I'm doing and beginning to get ahead in life a little bit. That, you know, all I could say to him or my mother both is thank you and that I love you very much. But, you know, I could never repay them for what they've done.
It's tough. It's been tough for Kyle being the son of the king. That's been an extra pressure put on him over the years, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, I think it's a twofold deal. You know, sometimes it's helped, sometimes it's hurt. It helped him a little bit to get him some recognition to begin with when he shouldn't have been having any recognition because he hadn't ever done anything. But that put him in a kind of a weird situation. You know, when I came along, Winston Cup, NASCAR racing was not a big deal, so I come in and follow my father's footsteps. Nobody pays any attention. It's just, you know, because it's not that big a deal. But the time Kyle got here, you know, the Winston Cup Series had got into pretty big operations, so he became a focal point, and that put a lot of pressure on him there. And also, we probably put a lot of pressure on him because at the time we didn't give him probably as good of equipment as what he should have had. We thought it was good, the equipment was as good as he was, but a lot of times it wasn't. So that made it tough on him too. But you know, from a sponsor standpoint, he was able to attract a sponsor a little bit better than just anybody coming out of the woods. But then also they expected him to do more, so that put pressure on him from that standpoint. But I think after a while he decided to heck with it. I'm Kyle Petty. I'm not Richard Petty. You know, I've got to do my own thing. I got to do it my own way. And a lot of times I don't know that he looks at me and he sees what I do, and he don't necessarily think that I'm doing it wrong. He just wants to do it a little bit different so that it'll be what Kyle Petty did, not what Richard Petty did.
You've been watching Richard for 54 years now, or for however 50. You were born in 60, so 31 years you've been watching Richard. 54. I've been watching 54. And you said when you're 11 or 12, you started to realize that your father was a little bit different than everyone else's father. Do you still realize the impact that the Petty name has all over the country?
The older I get, the more I realize it. I don't think, I think when I first started racing, or, you know, when I realized who Richard Petty was when I was 11 or 12, then that was one thing. And then to watch him win races and go on and win this and win that, then that was different too. And when I started racing and racing against him, then, you know, I was just racing against my father. I didn't really think a lot about it. But the older you get and the harder I realize it is to race and to achieve in racing and to win championships and to win races and stuff, then you begin to look at everything that he's done in a totally different light. And you begin to see what my grandfather did. And you begin to see what my father's done and what Pete Hamilton did, or Tiny Lund, and all the guys that drove, you know, for my father and for Petty Enterprise and stuff. You begin to see how much history there is in Petty Enterprise and what this one little place in Level Cross, North Carolina has done to take stock car racing and bring it out to a bigger audience, to the country and stuff. And, you know, when you look at all the races that Pascal and Tiny and Daddy and Pete and my grandfather and all those guys won, then, you know, you're looking at 200 or 300 races. And that's a lot of races over a lot of years. And you know, there's a lot of history there. And, you know, I don't drive there now. I drive for somebody else. But, you know, someday I'll end up driving back there. I'm sure of that. But, you know, you begin to look at things. I think the older you get, you begin to see things a little bit different. You begin to look at what your father's done or what this person's done a little bit different, and you begin to appreciate it more. So, yeah, I think each day you have a new and stronger appreciation for what my grandfather and my father and for what the Petty family's done.
You know, royalty keeps being passed down. We have the king, and the children are princes and princesses. When you first started, they did call you the prince of racing, didn't they?
Either that or the jester.
The jester? Court jester?
Court jester, that's it.
Do you like that name?
No.
You don't like that name?
No. I don't, you know, and I look at it like this. My father is Richard Petty. And, you know, and he's got to the point to where he's won so many races that I guess they just got tired of calling him Richard Petty in the paper, and they just started calling him the king. You know, it's just, everybody knew who Richard was, so let's start something else to get somebody to read. But, and it fits him, just the way, you know, certain things fit certain people. The way he wears that cowboy hat and those dark glasses, and the way he moves, the way he talks to people, the way he moves through a crowd and stuff, then it fits him. You know, being a royalty or a king or a prince, it doesn't fit me. I'm not in that mode, I don't think. But, you know, certain people just, they have that air about them, and they carry carry themselves a certain way, and he carries himself that way.
Well, how about Richard Petty? Is carrying the title, the king, around, does that put extra pressure on you?
Well, you the one that's put it on me. I didn't put it on me. You know what I mean? I don't pay any attention to it. I'm doing my own thing, and you know, I started 34 years ago doing my own thing. I'm still doing my own thing. And
but they don't even call you Richard anymore. They say, "Hey, King," right?
Well, yeah, but I sort of know who they're talking at, so it makes you feel good. You can't believe how good it makes you feel that people recognize you in that vein. But still, yet, you know, if somebody comes up and they want an autograph that said sign Richard Petty and then put King on it, I told them I can't spell it. I can spell Richard, but I hadn't gotten quite far enough to be able to spell King yet.
Was that fun? Those guys are wonderful. I sure hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.